dear respected panelists and participants, first of all, it is my honor and privilege as a coordinator of Center of Capacity Development and on behalf of organizing team to welcome you to this event. While reflecting on what could be done at a higher institution regarding the current situation in Palestine, possibility of organizing such an event came to mind. It would be the first of its kind in the country. The idea started to reach different administrative offices. Finally, from the office of the rector to the director's office, then academic registrar's office, it has been very much welcomed and received with maximum support. For that alone, I can't thank enough. Secondly, I offer my sincere thanks to the panelists who have responded to our invitation very positively. I believe that their contributions towards the discourse will enrich our understanding of the matter and have an impact on our mindset as well. Thirdly, I should use this opportunity to thank invited guests from different universities and associations. Their attendance is paramount because they will transmit the message to their masses. Among us, we have Kampala International University, Kampala University, Chambogo University, then we have students from Makerere University, Cavendish, and we have Executive Council of Muslim Students Association, and we have the female campus of IUIU, we have AL-HIDAAYA Foundation. In the house, we have Uganda Muslim Lawyers Association, Uganda Muslim Journalists Association, and Muslim Students Society of Nigeria in Uganda. Then about the topic, Gaza in Palestine, where there is 2.2 million people, half of them are children. One of the most densely populated places on the earth. You have got 140 square miles that has all this population, which means you are automatically a victim of the Israelis' any aggression. It is treated as an open-air prison according to Israeli officials' statement. They live in a horrific condition, 59% in poverty, 63% food insecure, 70% of youth is unemployed, 90% have no access to clean water, so on and so forth. I mention this because it is important to have this basic information in mind while reflecting on the catastrophic situation in Gaza. Lastly, the purpose of this event to familiarize public on protracted conflict in Palestine, to create an intellectual environment free of bias and prejudice, to make contribution to the discourse on the conflict, to inform public on the possible effects of the conflict on Islamic world. With these few remarks, now I invite Vice Rector Academic Affairs, Dr. Jamil Serwanga, to have the opening remarks. You're welcome, Doctor.
This morning is a special one in the sense that we are talking about something quite special as well, but something which is also happening in the world at this material time. The rector has given a background on why IUIU has this morning decided to call in an audience and address a matter of global importance to the Muslim Ummah. I would like to say that what I'm going to be doing as moderator is generally to steer this particular panel discussion in a manner that is going to be as beneficial as possible. I want to start by introducing to you members of the audience, our panel, which is here today. On the extreme side, we have Dr. Munir Safieldin, who is the director of UNICEF, and he has been here before to give public lectures in the audience of AL-HIDAAYA students. Dr. Munir, you are most welcome. We have next to him Dr. Yahya Sseremba, a researcher at Makerere University Institute of Social Research. Dr. Yahya, you are most welcome. And we have got at my next left, Sheikh Abduweli Muhammad. He's a Muslim leader in this country. He's an imam. He's a mutawaf, all right, and also an independent researcher. You're most welcome, Sheikh Abduweli. And I am Taha Kasule, the director at IUIU Kampala campus. Now, what we are going to do, in order not to spend a lot of time, I am going to simply say that our modus is going to be as follows. Each of the panelists will have an opening statement in about 20 minutes, inshallah. We are going to start with Dr. Munir, who is going to speak about the man-made disaster and the limitations of humanitarian response in Gaza, the need for a political resolution. And when he has his 20 minutes, we shall be taking notes. And in case we need clarifications and questions, jot them down, and we shall have an opportunity for members to ask either from what they have spoken or what they have motivated you to think about. After him, we shall have Sheikh Abduweli, who will talk about "We Are Because They Are," Palestinian question and the rest of the world. This is what Sheikh Abduweli will talk about in about 20 minutes or so. And then after him, we shall invite Dr. Yahya to talk about Zionism, Nazism, and the intersection of the two genocidal ideologies. And then when he's also done, we shall then invite a discussion that will involve you as participants and the panelists, inshallah ta'ala. I would like to, is he around? We expect somebody from Muslim Lawyers Association. Has somebody come to represent? All right, okay. We have somebody from the Uganda Muslim Lawyers Association. I'll take the credentials later. And then, inshallah, we shall also allow her to make a statement. And after that, we shall now open the panel. And look here, in this audience, we have most of you young men and women, perhaps in your early 20s. You basically are just hearing about this Palestinian problem because of the last 40 days. Maybe there are a lot of things you don't know, so this is supposed to be an informative discussion, but also as intellectuals in the making, in your various professions, we would like you to be able to look at world affairs with a critical mind, not just to follow what people are saying, but to be able to understand them and also put yourself in a situation where you can be of assistance to the people who actually need it. I don't want to waste a lot of time. I want to invite Dr. Munir. Dr. Munir, you are free. If you want to do it from there, you can do it from there. If you want, you can come over here. It's up to you. Okay, Master.
آله وصحبه وسلم. It's a great pleasure for me to join all of you today here, and I would like to thank the university, IUIU, for organizing this very important get-together for the Muslims in Uganda to deliberate, to discuss what is happening in Palestine, and to also deliberate on what role can we play in contributing to the support of the fellow Muslims in Palestine. Let me start very briefly by adding more facts to the list of very painful facts that Mr. Saim shared with you at the beginning of this session. Now it is 75 years since Israel forcibly occupied Palestine. 75 years. 75 years and the Palestinians are living under occupation. And these are not our words as Muslims who are sympathetic with fellow Muslims in Palestine. The description of what Israel is doing in Palestine as illegal occupation is based on the international law, on the UN resolutions. So this is an established fact. It's not about being sympathetic, emotional about anything. Number two, since the occupation of Palestine, the land that is now left for the Palestinians to live on is less than 5% of their original country 75 years ago. Less than 5%. And this land is not even a continuum, is not a piece of land that is connected and people can move freely within it. It's mainly two chunks, the West Bank and Gaza. West Bank is completely under the Israeli control. So the headquarters of the Palestinian Authority, Abbas and his government, they are not sitting in an independent plot of land. I wouldn't call it a state. They are living under the occupation. It's the Israelis who decide what services they can get and what services they could be deprived from. Now, on the other side of what used to be Palestine, close to the Mediterranean Ocean, Mediterranean Sea, Gaza, something like 365 square kilometers, inhabited by 2.2 million people, the highly densely populated plot on planet Earth. Since 2008 until now, the Israeli army attacked Gaza 5 times. This is the 5th time the Israeli army uses its mighty military power to attack Gaza. So in Gaza, the first attack was in 2008-2009, and it lasted for 23 days. The second attack was in 2012. It lasted for 8 days. 2014, an attack that lasted for 50 days. 2021, an attack that lasted for 11 days. 2013, an attack has been ongoing uninterruptedly for 45 days. During these 45 days, the amount of explosives thrown on the people of Gaza has exceeded 25,000 tons. And according to information from military experts you can find publicly on the internet, the effect of these 25,000 tons of explosives that have been dropped on the heads of the people of Gaza within that limited area, the effect is equivalent to 2 nuclear bombs. So you know that in history what happened by the US in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The 2 bombs that were dropped in Japan have equivalently been done over the last 45 days in Gaza. The death toll has become almost uncountable because there are so many people under the rubble and no one knows whether they are dead or not, but presumably dead. More than 13,000 people have been killed, slaughtered. More than 6,000 of them are babies, children, including newborns. And more than 3,000 of them are women. The dollar value of the physical destruction, not counting human lives, the physical destruction that has happened over the last 45 days is equivalent to $51 billion. More than 50% of the buildings in entire Gaza have been flattened. Schools included, hospitals included, all the infrastructure has been completely destroyed. And yet, the UN Security Council has continued to fail to come up with one resolution condemning the human loss of life, condemning the act of Israel in Palestine, specifically in Gaza. No resolution was possible because of the American veto. At the same time, the resolution proposed by a few countries to have a temporarily humanitarian ceasefire has completely failed to pass through the UN Security Council. What does it tell us? That the international organization, which is the UN, is currently facing a big challenge. It has become dysfunctional at the senior level. As you know, the UN as an organization has a number of layers of structure. The UN Security Council is the top leadership, followed by the General Assembly. And then there are so many UN agencies, UNICEF, WFP, WHO, which are not political. They are there to provide different types of support and assistance to the member states. But the UN Security Council is the controlling body, and it emerged after the Second World War. So it is designed to reflect the balance of power, the winners of the Second World War. And for those of you who have been following, 75 years ago is just before the Second World War, when there was on the map of the world a country called Palestine and no country at all called Israel. So after the Second World War and the emergence of this new setup, the winners and the losers of the Second World War, you will start to see there is no country in the maps of the world called Palestine. But interestingly, if you go to the Old Bible, you will still find in the Old Bible a country called Palestine, and you will not see anything called Israel in the Bible, especially if you go to any of the versions of the Bible going before 1950. So let us now look at what is happening. There is a complete inability of the UN Security Council to take any resolution to stop the aggression against the Palestinians. And that's why a number of countries went to the UN General Assembly, where there is more of democracy. Each country has one vote. There is no veto. And they put on table a condemnation of the attack. They put on table a call for ceasefire, and they succeeded with a majority of votes. So it shows you where the will of the world is and who is blocking the will of the world. I believe it's also a reflection of the failure of the Muslims around the world, we included. When the war of 1973 happened under the leadership of Egypt, and they attacked back on Israel and they crossed Sinai, took the Israelis by surprise. The Gulf countries, specifically Saudi Arabia, they took a very firm decision. They stopped the flow of oil to the West, to America, which forced America to take a different position at that time. There are so many people of humanitarian background, women from Latin America, who has been calling on the Muslim world. You are not weak. You are powerful in terms of the resources God has given you, those resources in your hands. Why don't you use these resources to put pressure in a positive, constructive way to help your fellow Muslims? But they don't have the courage. They don't have the dare to do it. The attack on Gaza, a recent one, has shown how the Palestinians have been exactly acting the same way the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ described them more than 1,400 years ago. Let me read for you hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, where he said, لا تزال عصابة من أمتي يقاتلون على أبواب دمشق وما حوله وعلى أبواب بيت المقدس وما حوله لا يضرهم خذلان من خذلهم ظاهرين على الحق إلى أن تقوم الساعة. The Prophet ﷺ said, there is a group of my ummah, of my people, of the Muslims, who will continue to fight for what is right around Damascus and around Jerusalem. And they will continue to do this, never minding the disappointment that they will experience, never minding the disappointment that they will be experiencing. This is what is happening now. This is what has been happening to the Palestinians. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us something about the history and the continuity of the fight around Jerusalem. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, these people will continue to be visibly fighting for what is right, ila an taqum as-sa'a. So this war is not going to end now or tomorrow. Now, with this background, I want to come to one thing. Many people have been asking for a humanitarian cease of fire. That means it's not a permanent cease of fire. Stop the fight just for a short period to allow us to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza. And Gaza is fully controlled from all sides, including from Rafah, which is part of Egypt. It's controlled by Israel. All the entry points, the exits into Gaza are fully controlled by Israel. And no Muslim is able to get even a bag of salt, a bottle of water into Palestine without the Israelis saying yes. So now the UN has made an appeal, which is for about 90 days, asking for the international community to provide funding for the UN to provide aid for the people in Gaza. They have asked for $1.2 billion to provide mainly food and health care. $1.2 million. Do you recall the number or the estimation of the physical destruction? $51 billion. So they are not talking about rebuilding any hospital, rebuilding any road, rebuilding any school. They are talking about just $1.2 billion to give food for 90 days to the people of Gaza. And you know how much money has been raised until now? $150 million. They are asking for 1.2 million. They have received 150 million. I'm rounding the figure. It's not even $150 million. It's a drop in an ocean. So this is what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ called khuzlan, disappointing, letting down the people of Gaza. Let me conclude by saying one thing. that what we need at the moment is not what the majority of the countries, the majority of the voices are asking for. They are asking for humanitarian assistance. This is a man-made crisis. And unless this man-made crisis is stopped through a political solution, humanitarian assistance is nonsense. It's nonsense. You cannot tie the hands of someone and say you cannot work, you cannot produce your food, you cannot produce water to drink, and I will decide when to feed you and how much I will feed you. I will decide whether you will drink water or not and how much. And we say this is humanitarian. This is inhumane. It will not change by the UN Security Forces members. We cannot count on China, Russia, UK, US, Europe to change this situation. They have a stake in what is happening in Palestine. And if I have the opportunity, I will come back and tell you why Israel is acting the way it is and why Europe is supporting it. It's because of the gas that has been discovered there. So those who are supporting the war are waiting for Gaza to disappear and for the oil and for the gas which is beneath that land and on the coast of Gaza to be explored quickly, to be exported quickly to Europe to save them during the coming cold season, because they have blocked gas from Russia and they need the substitute gas from that area. And that's why they want this war to finish, by finishing the so-called Gaza. We need a political resolution, we need a political solution, but this political solution, please don't dream it will come from someone other than the Muslims, if it is ever to come. Thank you very much.
Exactly 20 minutes. I would like to recognize the arrival of Council Siraji Katantazi from UMLAS. You're most welcome. I will now invite Sheikh Mohammed Abduweli to make his statement, and just as a reminder, he's going to talk about we are because they are, Palestinian question, and the rest of the world. You're most welcome.
Thank AU Islamic University in Uganda, Kibuli campus, for this opportunity, and also thank my fellow panelists and the guests. Dr. Munir, Jazakallah Khair, thank you for those words, really touching, and the history, and also we would like more from him, inshallah ta'ala, in discussion, to know more about what's happening in Gaza. Our topic is we are because they are. And that is, we'll start with a story. There's an anthropologist proposed a game to children. So he told them that whoever reaches the fruit, he will have all the other fruits. So the children, instead of racing to the fruit, they all walked to the fruits holding their hands. So when they reached there, they found them, everyone sharing with the other. So he asked them, why didn't you race for the fruit and take the bigger share, whoever wins? The answer from those children were, we are all sharing now, and that is Ubuntu in Africa. So Ubuntu in Xhosa culture means I am because we are. It's an inspired philosophy by Africans mainly. In Shona language in Zimbabwe, it's called Unhu. In Rwanda and Burundi, they call it Gira Ubuntu. In Luganda, Ubuntu Ulamu. So this is a human behavior which means being human and sharing with others. In Arabic, we say, Al-insanu ka'inun yu'athiru wa yata'athar. That the human being is someone who is affected by what's happening around him and also has an effect on others. So that's why Adam alayhi salam, he couldn't live in Jannah alone, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him a companion. So in this world, we can't live alone as individuals, but we live with others around us, and in general, we live with humanity. The Quran emphasizes on humanity and the oneness of humanity. We are because they are. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ وَأُنْثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. You know, we created you from male and female, and you are nations and tribes just to recognize each other, but you are one. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن نَفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you from one soul. So whether you are black or white, or you speak another language, whether you are Muslim or not, the first thing is that we are one as human beings. So in this world, when Adam was being created, because when you read the Quran, and the Quran is the final testament, because we believe there was Torah and there was Injil, and also we believe the Quran. So as Muslims, we believe in the Bible, which is Injil, before it was a lot of things happened. So when you read the Quran, you understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to humanity most of the time. Ya ayyuhan nas, O you people. So as Adam was being created, and in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the original, where we came from. إِنَّا جَعَلْنَاكَ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. Khalifa is an inheritor of this world. So is to be one as human and to be just. Allah produces all from a single soul, which means that we have to be one, and we have to take care of this world, and also to be justice. But before we are just, we have to understand the dignity of human being. The dignity comprises rights and duties. It means that all human beings are created equal by the one creator, and no one is superior to another. No one is superior because of his race. No one is superior because of his color, because of what he knows. We are all one as human beings. So we come back to the background is we are because they are, that we are one. We are in Africa today, but we are one with those who are being oppressed. Let them be oppressed in Palestine, for example, or be oppressed in any other place in the world. Whoever is being oppressed, you should stand for him as a Muslim. Whoever, even if the one who is being oppressed is a non-Muslim, and the one who is oppressing is a Muslim, you should stand with the oppressed. And that is what the Quran says, standing for justice. O you who believed, be persistently standing firm in justice. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawwamina bil qist. And then he says, witnesses for Allah, even if it is being against yourself, or parents, or relatives, whether one is rich or poor, Allah is more worthy of both. So the kind of mentality which is needed in this world is to stand for justice, whether the one is being oppressed is not amongst you, or whether the oppressor is from your lineage, or your parent, or your children. So from that background, we go back to Palestine, that today what's happening in Palestine, unfortunately, and amidst the world's silence, is the mentality is no one is caring, because as Dr. Munir said, there are a lot of benefits from that land. People are waiting for whether to be gas, or whether to, these people who were brought yesterday to this place. So as people, or as humans, as Africans, as the world, what should the world do? is to stand against the oppression. And that should be clear. It should not be that, as I seek, for example, for humanitarian aid, or let's look about this question, the Palestinian and Israeli question, and how people could live together. We are not talking about that. We are talking about ethnic cleansing today. We're talking about people who are being killed, babies who are being killed in ICU. We are talking about bombarding hospitals, Al-Shifa hospital. Can you imagine that the whole world is watching and ICUs are being bombarded? We are seeing patients on the floor without oxygen, without anything, and still people are talking about humanitarian aid. So this kind of oppression, it should be stood with justice. Against this by justice, standing for what is rightful. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, who is the prophet of humanity, Allah says in the Quran, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً. We have not sent you unless that you are rahmah, you are a mercy to mankind. And being mercy to mankind is to stand for justice. For example, in Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes for the Bani Israel. If we could just go back to history, Israel is Yaqub alayhi salam. So because nowadays one of the, what is taking part is that this land is a Jew land, for example. It's Israel's land, that they own this land and they can do whatever they can do. You cannot come back after thousands of years and say, for example, in Uganda, that you people who are in Uganda now, this land was ours before 2,000 years. It's not impossible to be. But even if we go back to the history, Yaqub alayhi salam, who is Israel, there were people before him. Canaaniyin were there before even Israel himself. So you call yourself, we are the sons and daughters of Israel, but Palestine was there even before Israel. And we understand that Abraham alayhi salam. So going back to racism, it only shows you how deep you are in racism, in seeing that you are better than others. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about Bani Israel's in the Quran. He mentions them in a lot of places. And they say in the Quran, نحن أبناء الله. They said that before. We are the children of God. And then Allah says, oh Muhammad, tell them, فَلِمَ يُعَذِّبُكُمْ بِذُنُوبِكُمْ. If you are the children of God, then why is God tormenting you for what you have done? So even the Israelis, the Jews who are moderate Jews today should understand that the far extremists who are killing and bombarding people, that it's going to lead them to torment. They will torment them again in this world before even we go far. So the mentality is wherever you are fair and you have Ubuntu and you understand that as humans we should live together, and I can accept to tolerate, to live with others, then this will bring peace to the world. The mentality which says that we are the best, we have to be the prophets, we have to be the owners of this land, is what brings killing and terrorizing. For example, also, when they had, in the book of Torah, in the First Testament, and also in Injil, it is written that there will be a prophet in a land where there are deaths, full of dead trees. And that was Medina and Khaybar. What the Israelites did at that time is to go and live in Medina and live in Khaybar, thinking that the prophet should come from them. And when they heard Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has come to Medina, they said he can't be a prophet. Because he is not from us. Now all that background is that as Muslims we should stand against, and all as humans, as Africans, we should stand against the oppression, and justice is a tool to maintain balance. Wherever there is justice, there is balance in this world. For example, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَكُمْ فِي الْقِصَاصِ حَيَاةٌ. In qisas, killing, if someone kills deliberately another, then if you kill that person who has killed this person, there is life into that. Because that you'll be limiting people who kill others. 13,000 people have been killed today. That means those who were in this or participated or gave any ammunition or any weapons to these people should be, be accountable for the crimes of war they have done. Because we cannot just stand and say we are blaming Netanyahu, for example, and his government, while we know that the whole of the West and Europe has been supporting either militarily or emotionally or socially to this massacre and to this genocide. And this is a genocide. The whole world is saying, whether Muslims or non-Muslims. So I think we should come up as humans, as young men and women today, and understand that this is not only something that two people are being fighting, or it's about Palestinian and Israel. It's about humanity. It's about the whole world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says even in the Quran about وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ in the book of Israel that whoever kills one person, and this is we are because they are, whoever kills one person is as if he has killed the whole humanity, and whoever saves a life is as if he has saved the whole humanity. Now the question is, how can we help? I only have a few minutes to go. Is how can we help? It's a question. Two questions are being asked by a lot of youth today. Why are we weak? Why are the Muslims weak? That's number one. And the second question is, what can we do? So why Muslims are weak today, whereas we are strong? Gas, oil, everything is in the hands of Muslims today. Who are the neighbors? Who are the brothers and sisters of Palestinians? And this is why what even South Americans are asking today. Bolivia and other countries are asking, what's happening to the Muslims or to Arabs who are around, Palestine? We are very far from you. We could help. South Americans are saying from Bolivia and Peru and others, we would like to help, but we are far today. We cannot help. But what is happening to your brothers, to your cousins who are around you? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states this in the Quran very clearly. He says, قُلْ إِنْ كَانَ آبَاؤُكُمْ وَأَبْنَاؤُكُمْ. He says, O Muhammad, say, if your fathers and your children, وإخوانكم, your siblings, وعشيرتكم, your extended family, وأموال اقترفتموها, and wealth that you have acquired, وتجارة, and business and trade, تخشون كسادها, that you are fearing to decline, أحب إليكم من الله ورسوله. If all that is more beloved to you than Allah and His Messenger, وجهاد في سبيله, and struggling in the way of Allah, then wait. فتربصوا. It means that if you think that standing for justice, helping your brother, helping the oppressed people in the world, wherever they are, if you think that your trade, your business, your connections, your position, your job, your work is more valuable than this, then Allah says, فَتَرَبَّصُوا, then wait. حَتَّى يَأْتِيَ اللَّهُ بِأَمْرِهِ, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings His will. It means that that road is a closed road. That you will be weak amongst all people in the world. And this is what we are watching today. Even contributing to humanity has become, a problem. It's not even about talking, and people who are killing innocent people, they know that these people are weak and they can't do anything. So that the question should be answered that it's from us. Allah says in the Quran, قُلْ هُوَ مِنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِكُمْ. Whatever is happening in this world, it's from you. It's man-made, as Dr. Munir has said earlier. So the second question asked by youth is, how can we help? Number one is, as Muslims, we pray. And we believe that prayers can change. Number two is using the media as much as possible. Even if you have only 5 followers, for example, 100 followers, do not say that I am not an influential person, I cannot share. You share what you have. Share the information. Share what's happening in Gaza. Share every bit, children being killed. Share the numbers which are rising every day, 13,000. You know, this is not amount of money. This is not $13,000. These are 13,000 lives being killed. So we should share this more and more and see that how can we use the media. Today, the media is being also biased. A Meta group of companies which has a link to Israel has all suspended most of the accounts of pro-Palestinians. And also its algorithms that when you share, and we've seen that because we use social media, when I share a video talking about something else, for example, on my account, normally 10,000, 5,000 people will watch. But if I share information of Palestine, 500 or 200 people will watch. That's an algorithm that whenever you write Palestine or a video of Palestine comes out, they make it, you know, not to be seen by others. Answering to the illusions of the oppressors and what they say, we should do that as we are doing in this, event. Number 4 is to participate in events and functions like this. This is a good, initiative by IUIU. We would like this event to continue, maybe every 2 weeks, every month, until this oppression stops. We should participate in events, in research, in writing. And lastly, but not least, also is donating in the way of the oppressed. Donate what you can. And lastly is boycotting all, what we think that people who are fueling this war. Barakallahu fikum wa jazakumullahu khair wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Right, in a manner that really properly puts the perspective of what the situation is and what the world and we are to lead the world. Okay, so inshallah ta'ala, we hope that the audience is speaking the message from those opening segments. And now, without any delay, I want to invite Dr. Yahya Sseremba. And for those who have not been here, he is going to give the 20 minutes opening statement on Zionism, Nazism, and the intersection of the two genocidal ideologies. Dr. Yahya, you will go for 20 minutes.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I thank the Center for Capacity Building and the organizers for inviting me to give my opinions about what's happening in Gaza. So I will give a general framework in which this kind of violence can be understood, this kind of genocide, this kind of bloodshed, because it's not simply happening in Gaza, it has happened in very many places in the world over a very long period of time. So what is the context, the broader context in which that kind of genocide can be analyzed? To begin with, the state of Israel, like very many nation states, is founded on genocide. To create an exclusive homeland for the Jews, the Zionists have been displacing and indeed slaughtering the Palestinian people for almost a century. The Jews themselves, as we all know, were persecuted in Europe before the Zionists among them embarked on persecuting the Palestinians. The victims of European Nazi genocide became the perpetrators of Zionist genocide in Palestine. So the key question here, what was the problem in Europe that led to genocide? And what is the problem in Palestine that is producing another genocide? What is the point at which these two genocides meet? So let me give some brief history. As the Zionists displaced the Palestinians to create Israel in the first half of the 20th century, another displacement was taking place elsewhere as part of the partition of India on a religious basis to create Pakistan and India as separate nation states. Millions of Muslims had to leave mainly Hindu territories, and millions of Hindus had to leave mainly Muslim territories for the two nation states to take shape. More than 1 million people died in the violence that punctuated the process. The nation state is founded on the idea that every community that imagines itself as a nation has the right to self-determination by forming its own state. When such a community assumes statehood, the primary purpose of the state is allegedly to advance the interests of this community. If the state exists in the name of a certain national community, what happens to other communities living alongside this national community under the same state? Such other communities are known as political minorities, regardless of their numerical strength, and their existence poses what the nation views as the minority problem. In the 500-year history of the nation state, the so-called minority problem has been addressed in 2 or 3 ways. First, the minorities have been subjected to ethnic cleansing to homogenize the population and get rid of cultural diversity. The first modern atrocities of this kind started in 1492 when the Jews and Muslims were expelled from Spain. Both in Europe and in the European colonial settlements of America, Australia, and New Zealand, the Europeans have perpetrated genocide on indigenous peoples to create white settler colonial nation states. The 1994 Rwandan genocide, which sought to eliminate the Tutsis, is a recent example of how the minority problem has been handled in history. The same applies to the killing and displacement of the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar going on today. Where the minorities have not been eliminated completely, they have been reduced to small manageable numbers that can be dominated without serious resistance. This is what happened to the native Indians in the white settler colonial states of America and elsewhere. It is also what China is doing to the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang and other societies in Tibet. China is applying policies that seek to reduce and weaken the populations of these societies and indoctrinate them with the dominant ideologies of the nation in order to dominate them without much resistance. The other way in which the minority problem has been addressed is to tolerate the minorities. Tolerance, as the liberals prescribe. Tolerance is the liberal solution to the minority problem. Unfortunately, tolerance only applies when the minorities have been weakened and no longer pose a threat to the supremacy of the national community. But when the minorities become powerful economically or politically, tolerance ceases to apply. The minorities are quickly labeled as outsiders who must be dealt with to protect the national community from being dominated by these alleged outsiders. This is the broader context in which Uganda expelled the Indians, the Kenyan Luos, and the Banyarwanda in recent decades. The Ugandan nation state, the Ugandan nation imagines itself as an association of indigenous communities, which are listed in the 3rd schedule of the 1995 Constitution. Every Ugandan citizen who does not belong to any of these purported indigenous communities is practically half Ugandan and can be stripped of citizenship under certain circumstances. The problem of the liberal notion of tolerance is that it upholds the logic of the nation state, which is founded on the distinction between the national community and the minorities. The principle of tolerance, I would like to emphasize, only requires the national community to tolerate the minority communities. But the said principle does not ask why there should be a national community in the first place. Tolerance, I would like to emphasize, does not apply when the national community feels that its dominance is threatened by the minorities. The current rise of extremist nationalism in the form of far-right politics in Europe and elsewhere is based on the supposition that the national majority in those countries is threatened by the growing numbers of the minority populations. Unlike the nation states in places like Europe and America, the white settler colonial state of South Africa fell short of committing a comprehensive genocide that would have permanently weakened the indigenous population, the black population. The failure to weaken the indigenous population through an effective genocide meant that the white racist rule in South Africa needed to continuously use extreme forms of naked violence and extreme forms of apartheid to dominate the indigenous population. But extreme forms of naked violence and extreme forms of apartheid are not sustainable means of maintaining power. It would only be a matter of time before white racist rule collapsed in South Africa. This is also the problem of the Zionist state of Israel. The Palestinians remain numerically strong and able to resist. To dominate such a huge resisting population, the Zionists will continue unleashing extreme forms of naked violence and extreme forms of apartheid. The genocide unfolding in Gaza and Palestine in general is the inevitable product of Zionism. Zionism is rooted in the logic of the nation state, which logic also unfortunately kind of applies to Uganda because Uganda is also a nation state. Political Zionism seeks to advance an exclusive homeland for the Jews in the form of a Jewish nation state in Palestine. Such an enterprise necessarily calls for the elimination or domination of the Palestinians. Zionism is a version of Nazism, which sought to eliminate inferior races from Europe and establish Europe as a land of pure white peoples. The Nazi genocide, which killed many Jews, is often portrayed as an exception in Europe. On the contrary, this genocide belongs to the long European history of eliminating minorities to form nation states based on imagined biological or cultural homogeneity. The failure to address the underlying drivers of the Nazi genocide in Europe laid the foundation for the ongoing Zionist genocide in Palestine. Following the military defeat of Hitler, the Allied powers focused on punishing individual Nazis who perpetrated the genocide, but they never questioned the underlying logic of Nazism. So what is this logic? Instead of questioning the idea of population purity and homogeneity at the heart of Nazism, and instead of exploring ways in which different races and cultures could live together in the same political communities in Europe, the European powers advanced the Zionist aspiration for a separate homeland for the Jews. In so doing, the European powers exported Nazism, this time in the form of Zionism, to the Middle East. Yet, the problem is not simply that the Jews moved to Palestine. So let me emphasize this. Let me make this very clearly. The problem is not that the Jews moved from wherever they moved from and settled in Europe, that is not part of the problem. We have all moved from different places and settled in different places. But the problem is that the Zionist Jews, once they moved, they sought to create a Jewish nation state in which the non-Jews had no meaningful place. That is the problem. This required to establish such a homeland, an exclusive homeland for the Jews, required the elimination or domination of the Palestinians. The Zionists from Europe and elsewhere did not seek to live with the Palestinians in one political community. Instead, they sought to create a new political community founded on the distinction between the Jews and the Arabs. Instead of behaving like migrants who should live with the existing population, the Zionists became colonizers. There is an important distinction between a migrant and a colonizer. A migrant moves to a new political community and lives with the existing community. A colonizer dismantles the existing political community and creates a new political community in which the migrant is on top and the natives are on the bottom. That is if they are not eliminated completely. So they never acted, they never behaved like migrants. Instead, they chose to become colonizers by subduing and almost eliminating the existing population they found in place. So what should the way forward be under such circumstances? Dr. Munir called for a political solution. So what kind of political solution should that be? Some people have called for a two-state solution, a nation state for the Palestinians along another nation state for the Jews, which is already in place. The problem with such a political solution that seeks to create a separate nation state for the Palestinians alongside another nation state for the Jews, the problem with such a solution is that it potentially replicates the European solution of creating a separate homeland for the Jews to address the Jewish minority problem in Europe. And of course, we know the solution of creating a homeland for the Jews, it never solved the problem of violence, as we can see today. It would mean that the Palestinians who happen to live in the Jewish state must be evicted, or if they choose to stay, they must live as second-class citizens in the Jewish state. It would also mean that the Jews living in the territory that would constitute the Palestinian nation state must be evicted, or if they choose to stay, they must accept to live as second-class political minorities. Now, this is the problem of the identity-based form of political association known as the nation state. It is founded on the assumption that there is a national community to which the state belongs and other communities that can only be tolerated if they behave well. If they misbehave, they can always be asked to leave. After all, you don't belong here. So, worse still, the Jews, like the Palestinians, are not a homogeneous category. Among the Israeli Jews, there are already tension between the Ashkenazi Jews, the Jews who came from Europe, and the Mizrahi Jews, the Jews who came from Arab countries. There is already internal tension, discrimination between these two categories. While among the Palestinians, there are Muslims, there are Christians, and others. So to carry forward any form of political association that is based on identity, like the so-called two-state solution, can only give rise to more identity-based conflicts. The way forward at the most basic level would be to begin by dismantling Zionism, not by forming two states, but by dismantling Zionism, which is an extreme manifestation of the chauvinistic divisiveness of the nation state. Only then can the Palestinians and Jews think of living together as equal members of one political community. Thank you very much.
The concept of Nazism, which perhaps people who never studied history might not have an opportunity to understand what it represents, but also understand the proper perspective, the concept of Zionism, because sometimes we hear this language being spoken and we never get to understand what it represents. You have also briefly touched on the racial concept of the Zionist movement, and I hope the intellectual audience has the capacity to understand that and also put a proper perspective on what it represents. There is a statement from Uganda Muslim lawyers. You have the floor for 10 minutes.
Yes. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, I bring you greetings from the Uganda Muslim Lawyers Association. My name is Mukasa Siraje Katantazi. I'm the Chief Executive Officer. So, according to the information I was sent, we are meant to give a legal perspective of the war in Gaza. But I think it has been Dr. Sseremba who has given us a snapshot of what this real conflict is. And I did what I called a dummy's guide to the historical context of this conflict. And allow me to go through it very fast, especially for our young audience that might not appreciate this fully. Pre-1948, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, the Zionist movement was established, and this one was to establish a Jewish nation. During 1947 to 48, the Nakba, or translated as the catastrophe, happened, where after the establishment of the Israel state, 750,000 Palestinians were made refugees and continue to be refugees. There were plans by the UN to petition this into creating a two-nation state, which never materialized. And of course, in 1948, there was a declaration of the State of Israel, and thereafter, the beginning of the conflicts. In 1950s and 60s, the world faced the Palestinian refugee crisis, and later the Suez crisis of 1956, where Israel, together with the UK and France, intervened in nationalizing the Suez Canal of Egypt, which initially had been controlled by Egypt, and of course it gave more powers to Israel. In 1967, there was the 6 Days War, where Israel made preemptive strikes in response to perceived threats and launched these against the 3 countries of Jordan, Egypt, and Syria. And of course, it started the occupation process in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. In 1987 to 93, the first Intifada, or the uprisings, happened where Palestinians stood up to fight for their rights in a series of protest strikes and acts of civil disobedience. Of course, this led to what is now called the Oslo Accords that were brokered and hosted by the US. Oslo, because this was the city, the capital city where they were held. But of course, nothing significant happened when Yasser Arafat, the then leader of the PLO, walked away. Then in 2000 to 2005, there was the second intifada of violence that escalated, leading to many deaths. 2005 to present, we've had the Gaza withdrawals where Israel left unilaterally, and then we've had conflicts, especially with Hamas, when for the first time, which was a miscalculation, they organized multi-party elections, and Hamas, which was a political player, but I think underestimated one in Gaza and took political leadership. Now, the ongoing issue is why we're here. So let me give you a snapshot of what international law is about, international humanitarian law. International humanitarian law is also called the law of wars. And there are certain principles that are expected when nations, after the First World War, nations came together and said, you know what, even when we are fighting, there must be rules that govern us. And some of these principles are really interesting, but the question is, are they being applied? The first one is distinction. Distinction simply says that parties to a conflict must distinguish between civilians and militants or combatants, as well as between civilian targets and military objects. It also means that it is forbidden internationally to target civilians or their objects. The second principle is proportionality. Proportionality means that the use of force must be proportionate to the military objective. Excessive harm to civilians and civilian objects compared to anticipated political advantage is prohibited. The last principle, of course, the principles are many, but the ones that I really wanted to bring to touch the nerve and lend further discussion, these three. The last one is precaution. Precaution means that parties must take precautions in planning and conduct of the military operations to avoid or minimize harm to civilians and civilian objects. So having given you the principles of the law on wars, and these principles have been established by the Geneva Conventions, which of course are conventions of the UN. Having given you that, and of course the additional protocols, these are some of the humanitarian violations, and then I'll try to contrast them quickly because I think my time is almost 3 minutes to the 10. The first one, targeting civilians. Deliberately targeting civilians is prohibited under IHL, International Humanitarian Law. But let's put it in context. Some of the notable leadership in Israel have made statements that indicate that it is not important whether civilians are killed or not. We know that as we speak. I think Sheikh Abduweli has mentioned it. Over 13,000 people have been killed. Of these ones, 5,500 are children, babies, including the ones in Shifa. I was watching a footage recently, and I said, where's our humanity? Where we have dead bodies, over 80 dead bodies that are not buried because people cannot move out of the hospital to go and pay their respects to these people. Of these, 3,500 are women. And we know that Islamic humanitarian law specifically prohibits the targeting of children and women. So there has been complete violation of international humanitarian law. So if we put it in context, if there are 13,000 deaths and counting, and of these 9,000, because if you add 5,500 to 3,500, you'll have 9,000, are people that shouldn't be targeted, then I don't know if this is not violation of IHL, what else it is. 2, indiscriminate bombing, which is called collective punishment. The Israeli government has targeted indiscriminately who it attacks. 3, use of prohibited weapons. We've heard of the idea of use of phosphorus, including using gas under the tunnels. Some people may take refuge in the tunnels, not necessarily because they are combatants, but because that is the only safe place. Attacks on humanitarian workers. This conflict has killed more humanitarian workers and journalists than any conflict since the advent of modern war. Forced displacements. Of course, we've been told that the Palestinians in the north should move to the south, but this has not spared them. We also know that the West Bank, which has nothing to do with Gaza, has also been attacked. Denial of humanitarian access. Even those who want to bring aid to the ones that are suffering are being denied to access. Torture and inhuman treatment, and the list go on and on. But I want to end by stating the following, very quickly. This war has exposed Western hypocrisy. What is surprising, I was watching another clip. Somebody did put a question in ChatGPT, AI. And the question was whether Israel has a right to defend itself. And ChatGPT AI retorted, of course, it is a right under the UN Article 51, and gave a detailed analysis of why they are entitled. Then the same question was posed as to whether Palestinians are entitled to a state of their own. And you know what the response was? The response from AI was that this is a complex question. So how does it become complex? So is AI really artificial, or is it even intelligent? Unless, as Sheikh Abduweli has said, somebody is controlling the narrative, we might not really be in this. And I think Dr. Munir mentioned the same. So as you said, what happens? Western hypocrisy, the role of the Arab world. The silence has been deepening. You know that until that attack, Saudi Arabia was on the verge of normalizing relations with Israel. And I watched a clip yesterday, and they were saying that these plans have been put off for at least another 3 years at the least, which means that they are not really off the record. But where's the rest of the Arab world? Now, it has, as Dr. Munir said, this is a political question and needs political players to answer it. So, there are new global players that have emerged. I want to bring out one particular one, two actually. The first one is Qatar. Until recently, Qatar was not a major player, but of course, oil money and whatnot has repositioned it as a key player in the politics of the Middle East. They are the ones that have actually pitched to broker a deal to bring about an immediate ceasefire. And China, as of course holding the rotational presidents of the UN Security Council, has also played a role. What is critical about China is that they have refused to condemn Hamas or name the group in any of their statements. So you would ask yourself simple questions. Before the IRA and Sean Fenn, the IRA is the armed group of Sean Fenn, which was an armed struggle in Northern Ireland. Before they took political position, they were considered to be a terror organization. But now, because they are in leadership, it changed. South Africa, when South Africans were fighting for their rights, Nelson Mandela was considered to be a terrorist. But what changed the narrative or the perspective is when the international community rose up to support the South African position for them to be freed from apartheid. We are seeing the same emerge. In the past, Israel and the US, of course US is the biggest supporter of Israel, have been controlling the way the media is portrayed. But we now know that with the emergence of independent journalism, people have been exposed to the true reality in Gaza. And what this has done is that we've seen unprecedented protests across the whole world in support of the right of Palestinians to independence and to their own state. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this is an intellectual debate, but that is my snapshot of the position of where IHL stands in regard to the current Palestinian conflict.
Thank you so much. Part of the narrative and the commentaries that we see in the media are speaking a lot about, the idea of international law, although, as we also know, it is being spoken about only on one side. All right? All right, now we are going to have the next 30 minutes in the discussion. Members, we invited this at 10 o'clock. We started at 11. We are all late, so we should have only ourselves to blame. But let me take one round of questions from the moderator to each of the panelists, and I want to ask them to really make it short and straight. I will start with you, Dr. Munir. In your winding comments, you seem to suggest that the solution is not humanitarian. We want a political solution, and what has been on table for a long time is this idea that there should be a political solution of the nature of two states, one for the Palestinians and one for the... But my question here is, this particular political solution is, I think, being marginalized directly by Israel. They really don't want it. Every time it appears, they will always say, let them do this, let them stop this one, let them stop this one. And again, they say it will only emerge as a matter of negotiation between these two countries. Do you really see this as a viable issue where we stand now?
My simple answer is yes. I don't see Israel eliminating the Palestinians. The Palestinians are there and they will stay. I don't see the Palestinians eliminating Israel. I think some of the historic mistakes we made as Muslims under the leadership of the Arab leaders who were in charge of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is that they rejected a number of proposals without being prepared for an alternative scenario. At the moment, there is a legitimacy, international legitimacy, supported by international law, supported by UN resolutions, that yes, there should be two states, an independent state for the Palestinians and another independent state for the Israelis. And if we go for that option, it's possible, it's doable, and I do believe that it will give the Palestinians what they need at the moment. Yes, they have lost the country they have had more than 75 years ago, but if they go back to the boundaries of their country of 1948, they are much better. Instead of having less than 2% of their land, they can have more of their land. And I believe strategically, tactfully, tactically, this is the way to go. Otherwise, this conflict will continue.
Thank you so much, Dr. Munir. Sheikh Abduweli, you seemed to sound so much in your presentation with the idea of people standing for justice. And as a matter of fact, in the last 40 days, we have seen a lot of people worldwide coming up in the streets and standing with Palestine. But this particular justice is being impeded by the powerful nations, as we all see them always dropping a veto on everything that seems to say this is where we stand as a global community. How do you think, in the framework of the present international configuration, this justice can come for Palestine?
That's a very good question. The states which are standing with Israel and supporting this to their ideas and the lobbyists who are behind this, what do you understand that we are in a democratic world? And those people who are in power today were elected by the masses. So it's upon the masses to change this, and this to the demonstrations and people going to the streets is something very beneficial, which will help even in the elections which are coming in America tomorrow and even in Europe, to show that the masses should stand for justice. Because in Harvard University today, where at the entry we see that verse of the Quran which we mentioned earlier, which says, "Kunu qawwamina bil qist," stand persistently with justice. So I think how we can overcome it is that, because the world is democratic today, people should stand for justice and should pressure their government and understand that whoever stands with the oppressors will not rule us. Because as Muslims, or as the whole world today, we elect our leaders. We have the right to elect our leaders, and that's even what Islam, supports. It's electing. Uthman radiallahu anhu was elected, either to be elected by the masses or some few people. But we have the will to change. So as people, we have the will to change our governments, and then these governments will change, our leaders will change the situation which is happening in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sheikh Abduweli. And one question to Dr. Yahya. You ended at a point where you actually criticize the idea that two nations based on ethnicity does not seem to work, because we are perpetuating a problem where you have people who have rights to the land because of their ethnicity. And therefore you call for the dismantling of Israelis, when indeed the status of Israel and Israelis who continue to defend this particular country. Somebody will also tell you Hamas is standing for a philosophy or an ideology in which they say we have to dismantle Israel completely. Are we not finding ourselves in a situation of a zero-sum solution in your own words?
Thank you very much. So let me first shed more light on the problem of the nation state. So I mentioned Pakistan and India. So Pakistan is the solution to the conflict between the Hindus and the Muslims. The solution is that create Pakistan for the Muslims and leave India for the Hindus. But in reality, we know that there is no single territory that can be occupied exclusively by one ethnic group, by one religious group, by one culture group. And we know today that despite the formation of Pakistan, which has about 200 million Muslims, there are still almost another 200 million Muslims living in India. And we know how they live. They live as second-class citizens, partly because you were given Pakistan. What are you still doing here? The same applies to the Hindus and other minorities who are living in Pakistan. This nation was created for the Muslims. We are doing a favor to you to accommodate you here. So if you don't like your second-class status, you are free to leave. So there is a fundamental problem within the logic of the nation state, which is founded on race, ethnicity, culture, etc. I like the verses that you recited, Abduweli, that most of the verses in the Quran, God refers to us as Ya ayyuhan nas, O you people. So if God looks at me as a human being, what is the basis on which the Ugandan Constitution categorizes me as a member of an indigenous tribe? So the Ugandan Constitution reduces me to a tribe's person, to a member of a tribe, not a human being, not a citizen of of Uganda. So that's one. Second, let me also make this clarification. You said Hamas is calling for the destruction of Israel, assuming it does. So when I call for the dismantlement of Zionism, I'm not really meaning that that a genocide must be committed on the Israelis, on the Jews living in Palestine. This is something that the Jews have used to silence every criticism of Israeli policy, to silence whoever comes up and criticizes the Israeli government, that you are calling for genocide, you anti-Semitic. The dismantlement of Zionism means that the ideology, the idea that there must be an exclusive homeland for the Jews, a place where it is only and only the Jews who have the right to live with all the rights. That is the ideology that needs to be interrogated. And I'm also saying that that kind of ideology may be extreme in Israel, but it is not exceptional. It is not exclusive. That kind of ideology, though in a more mild manner, also exists here in Uganda. Because in Uganda, the Constitution tells us that Uganda belongs to the indigenous tribes of Uganda who are listed in the Constitution. Meaning that if you are not a member of the indigenous tribes, we can give you citizenship under certain conditions, but we can also withdraw it if you misbehave under certain. So, all right, thank you.
I think it's a point well made, but Dr. Munir seems to disagree.
If I, briefly say, I think we need to be realistic. Maybe if we are living in an ideal world, we will live in an equal citizenship everywhere you go. But that's not the reality. I don't think we have the power, realistically, as whoever we are, to dismantle Zionism. Zionism is bad. But Zionism controls the politics in Europe and the United States. Speak to any, congressman or woman in America and ask them where do they get their money and political support for elections. They tell you the same groups we have to support. At the same time, yes, there are states built on the notion of being an ethnic group, a select ethnic group. But we also have a challenge with the idea of Dar al-Harb wa Dar al-Islam. Let me be very honest with you. When we talk in Islamic fiqh about Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam, we're talking about a state where Islamic rule prevails and a state where non-Islamic rule prevails. So the state where Islamic rule prevails is a state where Muslims are a unique population. They have rights different than the rights of the non-Muslims. So I think the question is deeper, philosophical, but I think even in our Islamic fiqh, we do talk about a state which is completely ruled by Islamic rules, and anyone who is not a Muslim doesn't have equal rights. It's there. We cannot deny it. Same thing for some ideas of the nation state. But I think that is philosophical. We need a practical solution, and the practical solution at the moment can go as far as we can afford to implement, given all the, ceteris paribus, all the equal things that are around us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to invite someone.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I would wish to question Dr. Munir the position of Hamas in Palestine specifically, because we may not know the standing they have in this conflict. We may Google around and receive certain information that is kind of false, but now I would wish to know the authentic concept.
What was that exactly? The position of what?
Hamas.
Thank you.
Position of Hamas in Palestine. Position, okay.
Okay. Next. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. My question is, with the role play of the UN, which is being controlled by Europe, specifically England, and US, which are direct backers of Israel, can international law really prevail in the conflict between Israel and Hamas?
Yes, the one in the yellow.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My question goes to Sheikh Muhammad Abduweli. Is a clarification on the point made on the scholars, like Muslim scholars, that usually criticizing Hamas, particularly Palestinians, in regard to their different theological idea. Like to say, most of them are not Sunni, so why the Muslims or the world are supporting them in eliminating this kind of atrocities committed to them, especially if people disregard them, that they don't follow like Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or they are just, they have their own different ideology, which is not common to Muslims. Thank you.
It's understood. Thank you so much. Let's come back to the bench for a while. We are going to take it.
In Gaza, when there were free elections after the Israelis unilateral withdrawal in Gaza about 15 years ago, the people of Gaza elected Hamas. And Israel wanted now, by this collective punishment, to create a gap between Hamas and the people of Gaza. They wanted the people in Gaza to stand up against Hamas, to disown Hamas. But the opposite is happening. Everyone in Gaza at the moment is very supportive of Hamas. They see Hamas as their legitimate leadership. They see Hamas as standing up to fight for their freedom. They see Hamas as a freedom fighter that represents us.
In fact, Dr. Munir, if you can add the word on that, what the young men hear all the time in the news comments is Hamas is a terrorist organization.
Well, Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. What do you think the world now how the world now describes Nelson Mandela? A hero.
Icon.
Icon. Okay.
Dr. Munir, Hamas
Yes.
is a creation of the Israelis. Initially, they were supported by Israel. When they took over power and then they changed their ideology to counter the ideology of the Israelis, that's when they were labeled terrorists and they were creation of Israel.
I fully agree with what you have said because I have read it. I heard it from Clinton when she was the minister in charge of foreign affairs, that she is the one who created Hamas and she is the one who created Taliban. Yes, we hear this a lot. I don't believe in it, honestly. There was a movie, if you remember, when Taliban kicked out the Russians out of Afghanistan. Rambo, this hero, American actor, had a wonderful movie about how he landed in Afghanistan and led Taliban, the illiterate idiots who understand nothing, he led them to defeat the Russians. And the Americans didn't like the idea that Taliban kicked out the Russians, and they wanted to say they were the heroes who did this. Whether someone created or supported the creation of Hamas at one point or the other, I believe at this moment is irrelevant. Hamas stands for what it stands for. Hamas is not representing the interest of Israel. Hamas is not representing the interest of the Americans. Hamas is a different entity at the moment. And this is the Hamas I'm judging and I'm talking about.
Thank you so much. Sheikh Abduweli.
Jazakumullah khairan. I would like to clarify on that point of Dr. Munir and also Dr. Siraj about Hamas, created by the Americans or created by Israel themselves. They did not create it. Hamas was already there but they supported Hamas in some places. And why they supported it is they didn't want the two-state resolution, that we should have a government in Buffer al-Gharbiyya, West Bank, in Palestinian lands, and another government in Israel, as they say. They didn't want that. So the extremists and the far-right Zionists, what they did is to support this group of Hamas, so that they will tell the world tomorrow, you see that this is a terrorist group which is there, so we cannot, recognize this group as a government. That's why they supported it sometimes, but it's not that they created it. No one created Hamas. Sheikh Ahmed Yassin had this vision before, and after that they worked hard today, where we are seeing that they have destroyed more than 200 tons. And this should be mentioned. We should mention, as others are killing young children and women. In other words, Hamas has not killed a lot of young children and women today. Even in October 7th, where they are saying that Hamas killed babies, it has been now approved by Israel. That October 7th, it is that Israelis who bombarded and killed the 1,300 people. Because we have seen cars which were burnt. And now the pilots are the ones who are now testifying, saying that yes, we shot some Israeli people and we destroyed, thinking that maybe they were Hamas, and which is allied. So it's very long to go there. I would not like to.
Yeah, there was a question from the audience.
Yes, I'm answering that.
Please.
I just wanted to clarify on that. Muslim scholars criticizing Hamas, we don't have time for that. And we understand that a lot of Muslim scholars today are pressured by the governments there. If the surrounding governments of Palestine cannot help politically, what do we expect from scholars who are just, giving now excuse that this is fitna, and that's not an excuse. People are being killed, and you're talking about Sunni and Shia. We're not talking about Sunni and Shia. We're talking about humanity here. Even though they were not Muslims, we would have to stand, for them and be with the oppressed. So that is, a very weak excuse of saying that.
Yes, as a matter of fact, in addition to that, the people who are standing with Palestine in the West, on the streets and so on, they are not Sunni, they are not Shia, they are non-Muslim, and they are saying we are standing with Palestine. So the idea that somebody who is supporting you is not from your creed is really irrelevant, and I think to a large extent a diversionary concept. Now, there was another question I didn't hear it very well. I don't know whether that was for Dr. Yahya.
International law can work.
International law is there.
Countries and the US.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead on that side.
That is here.
The question was whether international humanitarian law can work under the present construct. And my answer would be no. Because last week, the first UN resolution was passed, and it was calling for a ceasefire. Do you know which countries abstained? You can guess. Which two countries abstained? The US and the UN and the UK. Do you know the reason they gave? Because in the resolution they refused specifically to condemn Hamas. But it was asking for a ceasefire. The ceasefire means that both sides must cease hostilities. So whether you mention or condemn Hamas, or mention or condemn Israel, is irrelevant. What is important at that point is that there is a ceasefire, and the ceasefire is to help the people who are being targeted. So whether international humanitarian law can work, my answer would be, if we look at it from an academic perspective, it ought to work. But from a political, realistic perspective, it is not working because there are people, there are countries that are deliberately trying to stop this. Who broke up this ceasefire? Malta. Malta is a very small country, but it pushed, and they managed to get people to concede and say, let's have a ceasefire. The last comment I want to make on that one is that there has been a seizure I think it happened yesterday by the authorities of a cargo ship within the region. Now the question is, are we going to see other nation players coming into this conflict? And maybe then, because what they're trying to push, if the US, they can reach a critical point and they become involved in the conflict, then we go back to international humanitarian law. Maybe then.
Thank you so much. Arab leaders to the current Gaza crisis, should we be pessimistic about the political solution, or is there a ray of hope? Dr. Munir, quickly.
There is a ray of hope. I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because for the first time for over 75 years, the narrative has changed. Just go to Facebook, which used to block anyone who speaks about Hamas or about Palestine or speak against Israel. And you will see now there are hundreds of video clips by people from the US, by people from UK, by people from around the globe who used to support Israel, who are now saying no. We are now seeing the reality. The narrative has changed, that's why I'm more optimistic. But I think to complete our optimism, we as Muslims, and I will not say Arab by the way, as Muslims, not Arabs, Muslims have to play our role. We are observers. We are sharing the videos of the white people who are standing and talking about, against Israel and in favor of Palestine. That doesn't help. So the narrative is changing, and the change is coming, but we have to be part of the change and not to fail our Muslim fellows.
Thank you so much. I want to ask this question to, because the question I didn't put who will answer, but let Dr. Yahya go for this. We have seen people come out to express solidarity with the people of Palestine through peaceful demonstrations. Why have we failed as Ugandans to do that? Is there real politics at play, Dr. Yahya?
Why have Ugandans not come out strongly to express solidarity with Palestine? So perhaps we need to understand what is Uganda. So Uganda is a predominantly Christian society, and a significant part of the Christians, the so-called Christian Zionists, believe that the Israelis, the Jews, are God's chosen special children. And they also have prophecies in the Bible which predict what is apocalyptic prophecies that allegedly predict what is happening to them. They may not have come out strongly to express those views in public, but in the US, many of them identify openly with them. And the Zionist Christians actually constitute a major component of Israeli support in the US. Nevertheless, it is your responsibility as someone who is enlightened to do your role and mobilize support for the Palestinian people.
Thank you.
So,
thank you so much.
I thought that I should make one comment, one more comment. So regarding the practicality of the dismantlement of the logic of the nation state, I will say two things. One, as thinkers, we cannot simply think within the restrictions of the existing realities, that this is what is real, this is what is working in the existing circumstances. We must also think beyond what is real in the existing circumstances. Otherwise, how are we going to imagine new realities if we simply confine our thinking within the boundaries of the existing realities? How are we going to imagine a new world, a different world that is different from the kind of world that we are living in? Second, I'm not convinced by the idea that the nation state is the only logical way of political association, because the nation state is something that is very new. In Europe, it is only 500 years old. In Uganda, the nation state begins with colonialism. Perhaps our challenge is to go back to the period before colonialism. That how did societies live before the invention of the nation state? What was Buganda? What was Buganda? Was it a nation state? Clearly, it wasn't a nation state. It was not based on the narrow, rigid understanding of ethnic or cultural identity. Many people came from outside Buganda and lived in Buganda and became Baganda. The Banyarwanda who came from Rwanda became Baganda with time. The Barundi who came from Burundi became with time. It is after the era, it's after the introduction of the nation state that whoever comes from outside Uganda is seen as a permanent outsider. So the notion of a permanent outsider based on culture is a new invention, which we must think beyond by drawing on history, not by going back to the past. I'm not saying that we should go back to pre-colonial Uganda. I'm saying that what can we learn from history, from the period before the invasion of the nation state?
Thank you so much, Dr. Yahya. A lot of questions seem to be coming to you, Dr. Munir, on the issue of the solution here. And I know this is really hot, but one of the questions that I will now give it to you so that you can handle. Somebody said, Dr. Munir, the legitimacy is okay, but Israel and the backers do not want the two-state solution actually. So it seems like it is something which we are following, but we cannot get.
Well, there are so many solutions that people had to accept. You know, the white people in South Africa, many of them even now, if you ask them, you know, the change that happened in South Africa, the end of the apartheid system was never something that they wanted. But when there is an international will to put things right, the party which is faulty will have to act differently. And this is what I see in the horizon, that the international community has started to see Israel as an aggressor and is forcing Israel to act within international law, not to be above the international law. And that's why at one point Israel, I believe, will have to accept the international law and the international will and to come to sense.
Thank you. Sheikh Abduweli, a question from the online audience is that the problem with democracy by the majority is that it is easier to end up with injustice against the good as long as it benefits those who voted for the unjust leaders. Election of leaders should be guided by Islam, not by human desires. Sheikh Abduweli.
That is a question which is out of this context, but we will write a little bit about it. It's about democracy in Islam. And what is democracy? Democracy is a Greek word which means that, you know, the rule is for a people. Whereas in Quran we read وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Those who do not rule with the rulings of Allah, then they are not the believers. And I think democracy, as we understand it, it should be the freedom of people to choose their leaders. And for the Muslim states, the rule of the law, we have sources. And the first source is the Quran, and the second source is the Sunnah. So there is no problem in drawing back to our sources, at the same time in choosing our leaders. For example, there is a book which is Al-HIDAAYA, the constitutional crisis of Islam from the biggest fitna when Uthman was killed to the Arab Spring. And that's where the problem of understanding that we had a free and fair elections after the death of Muhammad And Prophet Abu Bakr alayhi salam. After Abu Bakr, it came Umar. After Umar, there was elections between Uthman and Ali. And so between Ali, you could see Taha ibn Ubaydillah and others going around in Hajj, asking people whom should we let rule us. And that's so we need to understand what is democracy. Because now the concept is, the mindset that democracy is against Islam and Islam is the rule of law. We understand that we come on the Sunnah, that's our sources. At the same time, we have to be people are free. Even in the Quran, Allah says, La ikraha fi din. No one, there's no compulsion in religion. In the Quran, it is people are, we have the will to free. Ibn Umar, he told Amr ibn As, for example, and asked him and said, when do you start enslaving people? So about the book, we talks about the constitutional crisis is that we moved out of the fairness and the freedom of choosing our elections, and from the Umayyad dynasty we went into, monarchy system. That's why today that some scholars will support the monarchy system, but again will fight the democratic system which is fair and to elect the leaders. So I think it's not about the masses who rule, but our sources is the Quran, but we have the power as people to elect those who are just and to stand against this. We will not just wait, as others believe that we should wait for what our leaders say. No, we obey our leaders when we agree on something. No one is above the law of the Quran and the Sunnah.
We are going to wind up this discussion in the next 10 minutes because it's already past 1 o'clock. And I want to now go back to the audience in the room to take one more
possibilities. So my question is, why is it very popular? Why is the nation state very, very popular even in the most critical thinkers of our age?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My question is Dr. Munir. I don't think, from your words, my question is, what is more important to resolve this conflict? Is it a humanitarian support or actually a more political support, in the sense that humanitarian supports will kind of, from your lecture, you said they have attacked so far 5 times. So each time they attacked, I think Palestine receives support. If we keep giving humanitarian support and not draw a borderline that is going to be specific to resolve this solution, I don't think the other party that attack will keep attacking, and those that are all being attacked will only receive humanitarian support of water, food, and all.
What's more important, humanitarian or political?
Yes, that's the question. Thank you.
Next, one more question.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My question goes to Dr. Yahya. What is the problem in Palestine that has led to the genocide in the past 45 days? In just a few words.
All right, thank you so much. We have some of them. Again, I thank the panelists. I request our panelists to highlight whether the Western doctrine of Israelites' right to defense is being treated. And we have many others. There is another one again from Turkey. Hello, if we do, I want to ask a question. I joined the meeting late, maybe I could have talked. Do you think the response of African governments and the people of Israel's human rights violations in Gaza is sufficient? I think I shall ask Dr. Munir to answer that question. He says, do you think the response of African governments and the people to Israelites' human rights violation in Gaza is sufficient? Now, let's start with Dr. Yahya, quickly.
Thank you very much, Jacob. So Jacob is asking, why is the nation state very popular? If it is very problematic, as I have explained, why are many people yearning for it? We can broaden the question a little bit further and ask, why is identity-based politics seen as the norm? To the extent some of our colleagues say that there is no any other way of political association apart from one that is based on ethnicity and culture. So when I was conducting research for my PhD, I posed a similar question. I asked that why are tribal homelands very popular? Why are the people yearning for ethnic districts based on ethnicity? Why are ethnic kingdoms very popular? The Bakonzo, we want our kingdom. The Banyara, we want kingdom. The so-and-so, we want to break from this kingdom and form our own kingdom. And the explanation I gave in the thesis is that access to land and other access to resources and other rights has been attached to ethnicity, has been attached to indigeneity. If you say that your indigenous tribe is the basis on which you will get rights in Uganda, then everyone will yearn for being an indigenous tribe. Look at the Indians. The Indians are aggressively petitioning the state that recognizes us as an indigenous tribe in Uganda. This is because it is by being an indigenous tribe that you are guaranteed of perpetual citizenship. So it is not natural that people will yearn for that kind of ethnic-based political association. Once you attach rights, once you attach privilege, once you attach everything to one's identity, people will definitely yearn for that kind of. Every society will come up and say, please recognize us. We are also a tribe. We are also a tribe. Are you getting it? We are also a tribe. Because once you are recognized as a tribe, you're going to be given a district. You're going to be given representation in parliament. You're going to be given blah, 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 blah. So it is something that is rooted in the kind of modern politics, the ways in which modern politics has been structured. And no one should tell you that, no one should convince you that this kind of thing is natural. For centuries, as you must be aware, for centuries, the Indians, the Hindus, and the Muslims had lived together for centuries. I get it? They had lived side by side peacefully. It is after the colonialists introduced the notion of the nation state, are you getting it? That every national community, every cultural group must have its own political association. It is only after that kind of ideology was introduced that these people started, they said that from today, we can no longer live together. The Hindus live alone, and the Muslims, we shall live. So the other gentleman asks, what is the problem in Gaza? I don't think there is a single explanation of genocide. I don't think there is. You can give, Dr. Munir rightly mentioned that there is a political economy aspect to the conflict. There is gas, he tells us, that has been discovered underneath that could fuel the fighting. There are so many issues around that. However, I am interested in the problem of modern politics, the structural and logical problem in the ways in which modern political association has been imagined, and that is the identity-based character of the nation state. They are fighting, they have been fighting for 70 years over who has the right to live in Palestine, who has the right to have a state in Palestine. Are you getting it? They have been fighting for 100 years. So I'm focusing on that aspect of the problem that brings out the inherent contradiction in the logic of modern ways of political association.
Thank you so much, Dr. Munir. Dr. Yahya, as you leave the stage with this last question, I think you are living in this world of the theoretical correct kind of solution that will solve the entire kind of problem so that it doesn't happen maybe again. But the world is not like that. You know, Dr. Munir has been laboring to say, look, in the practical sense, you have people who have been here for 75 years, facing genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and so on and so forth, as we are mentioning it. Is it not really maybe feasible for us to say, okay, let's take it step by step? What's the first thing that we should do for Palestinians? Before we dismantle Zionism, the global giant, what is going to happen to the people of Palestine? Is it not a realistic idea? Start by giving them a state. After all, it has happened everywhere else. Then along the way, we can see at the next stage whether the idea of nation statehood is even correct on the basis of ethnicity and other things. How do you think about that?
Thank you very much. So the point I'm making is that the solution you're proposing is nothing new. It was done by the Europeans that the Jews have been persecuted here. The solution, create a different state for them. But what did it lead to? It only led to another genocide. Are you getting it? Look at South Sudan. The South Sudanese said that we have been persecuted by the Arabs, so-called Arabs. Give us our own state. What is happening in South Sudan? They are slaughtering each other based on ethnicity. There are so many countless examples. And I'm arguing that that kind of solution is short-sighted. You are solving a problem by creating another problem elsewhere. That is my point. You cannot address a problem that let us get the Jews from Europe by creating another problem for the Palestinians and putting them in Palestine. I understand where people are coming from, and it's really a complicated question, and I appreciate but my role as a student of political theory, as a student of the modern state, as a student of the state, is to advise you that if you continue thinking within those limited parameters, you will be only producing very limited, very short-sighted solutions.
All right.
That is the point.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Yahya. And I think that was the last question to him. Jazakallah khair. The idea has been understood, and I think the intelligentsia in the room will have to develop that further. Dr. Munir, you have a couple of questions.
Thank you very much. I want to add one point which is extremely important about the nature of the conflict between Israel and the Arabs, including the Palestinians. The conflict, by the way, at the moment is described as Israel-Palestine, but the conflict is much bigger than that. It's not about Palestine, okay? The dangerous part of this conflict is when someone think I have a God-given right to eliminate the other. We have this problem. The Jewish, they believe they have a God-given right, and they quote different verses to eliminate the Palestinians, even the children, because if they don't kill them now, they become terrorists in the future, become the enemy. Not only a human being, kill their animals. This is dangerous. And unfortunately, we have started to hear a similar tone from some Muslims. God has not given anyone the right to kill the other because of religion. And I'm happy if you want another debate, we come to that. God created all of us. And the Shaykh cited many verses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one who created us. If He wants to eliminate one party or one of His creatures, He would be the one to do it better than anyone. He would not create all of us and they say go and kill each other. So there is a fundamental problem here, which is, I think, different than the conflict we have seen before. This is important, and we need to come back to it, I hope, one day. Now, the most important thing, I'm not talking about humanitarian solution versus a political solution. I'm talking about the two of them together. My problem is with the voice that is now dominating, saying a political solution is difficult. We just need a humanitarian solution. Give them food. Give them a few days to get water, and then continue the killing. That's a problem. It's not one versus the other. It's the two of them together. Now, the third, the other point was the African leaders' response. Is it sufficient? Has it been sufficient? I will say two things. Number one, the African voice at this moment has been very different, have been very clear and outspoken compared to other times. And if you want more details, just listen to the ruling party representative, the lady who's the minister in South Africa. I wished we can all learn from her level of articulation of what human rights are, what human equality is. So I think the African voice has become more clearer. But it's not about African voice sufficient or not sufficient. The human voice around the globe, the international community's voice has not been sufficient. When will it be sufficient? When this massacre, when the slaughtering of people in Palestine stops, then we will say, wow, this voice has been sufficient. Let me close by just reminding all of you that I'm not here with my functional title. I'm here in my own capacity as a Muslim fellow, as a scholar, and everything I have said represents me, does not represent my organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wonderful and brain thought-provoking ideas. I want to send one question to Sheikh Abduweli as we wind up also. There is this whole opinion and actually reality, we have talked about it here, that the Muslim world has been very sluggish, has been very weak in front of the rest of the world concerning its response on what is happening to Palestine. And considering what our brother Council Siraji said, that international law is not going to work in the kind framework where some countries have power to say, we don't accept this because we are not happy with the way it has been done. Is there anything wrong if the Muslim world would come up today and declare that for us we now recognize Palestine as a state without the UN framework?
That's a good question. And I think now that the international law and the UN and also the ICC, for what was happening for the last 45 days, doesn't have anything to say now. You know, we are no longer looking at what international law is and what, we understand that the UN has failed. They have tried their best, but only 2 states can say no. So we should now reread these laws and say who has the veto. For example, the UN Security Council, only 5 states, to dictate the security of the world also should be reread again. How can we accept that? And that's what's happening now, that people are being killed. We have 13,000 people killed because only 2 states, 2 representatives said no. So I think we should reread that and conceptualize how we can overcome with a solution for humanity in this world. Muslims in the other way are weak today because of a lot of things, because of colonization, what happened to the caliphate of Islam and how it went down, what happened in dividing Muslims just a century ago in 1924-25 after we lost our caliphate, the Ottoman Caliphate. What happened? So we don't have a unified body, and every state of Muslim state has its own interests. Every group of leaders of those states have their own interests, which are also global interests sometimes. So that's why we cannot have a unified Muslim voice today. But that doesn't mean that we should look for a unified Muslim voice to overcome this. We should work around this with humans around the world, people who are free, as we want to be with Dr. Yahya Sseremba, as he said, the political theory of today. Are we right? Should we go back to before colonization? For example, we have problems even in our elections. As he said today in Africa, every district wants its own ethnicity. Someone will say that for us as tribes, today we support so-and-so who is our tribe. Now we are copying the democracy and how elections are being handled in the West. For example, in the West, if someone is a Swedish, in Sweden, he's a Swedish. But someone in Uganda is not a Muganda, for example. We have Wanyankole, we have the Luo, we have the Bantu, we have a lot of differences. So we should define our own way of democracy, and also we should define our humanity. How are we going to stand for justice, for dignity? How can we overcome this massacre, this genocide, which is happening today in Gaza? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us.
Council Siraj, I have read and I have seen it in the media. In Turkey, the parliament is actually debating a bill to recognize Palestine. How does that go against international law? Can one country come up and say, now I recognize it, irrespective of what everybody else says?
It is within the sovereign right of every nation to recognize another nation. That's how international relations have always been formed. Now, the construct of the United Nations was to have a global voice where world leaders come and do take recognizance of other nations. Now, it is within Turkey's right to recognize any state and any country that they feel. But the question is, does it apply to other countries? Does that recognition apply to other countries? And of course the answer is not, because it is not binding. But within Turkey's confines and legitimacy as a sovereign state, they can recognize any state they want.
And can they support it at war?
Actually, if you look at the Abrahamic Accords and the Oslo Accords, the Palestinians are de facto, not de jure. De facto means in fact. De jure in law. De facto, they are being recognized. And that is why this question keeps on coming up and coming up. Now, the difference is that as a state of Palestine, it is not earmarked by the UN, and that is where I think the catchword is.
Ar-Rahman-Rahim, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, Salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Our dear panelists, members of staff of the Islamic University in Uganda, guests from universities of Makerere. I wish I could see them. Makerere? Not yet. Chambogo University? Welcome. Kampala University? Not yet. And students from IU. They are not here. So, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I bring to you warm greetings from the Islamic University in Uganda top management, as led by our dear rector, Professor Ismail Simbwa Jagenda. We are grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the favor of life. We have gathered here this morning to address our minds to a matter of great importance to the Muslim world or the Ummah, the question of Israel and Palestine. Brothers and sisters, we have witnessed 45 days of brutal destruction of human life through unimaginable bombardment of civilian residences, hospitals, mosques, restaurants, schools, and refugee camps, among others. All this happens with unwavering support to Israel by world's most powerful and supposedly most civilized countries of the West. Yet, to consider that Palestine people have faced this unbearable suffering over the last 45 days is to water down their suffering of the last 75 years. We all know that Israel, which hypothetically portrays itself as the victim, has occupied, blockaded, terrorized, and exercised apartheid over Palestine society for decades. Watching the images of children dying helplessly in bombarded hospitals, women and old men buried under the rubble of flooded buildings, and the cruel genocide happening in Gaza, our cautious humanity cannot allow us to be silent, no matter how much the so-called civilized world tries to whitewash and sanitize the ongoing genocide against the defenseless people. Our assembly here today is the simplest action we can take to oppose with our tongues the Israeli genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and barbarism against the Palestine people. This is the answer to a famous hadith of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he is narrated to have said that whosoever of you sees an evil action, let him change it with his with his hand, and if he's not able to do so, then with his tongue, and if he's not able to do so, then with his heart, and that is the weakest of faith. Dear panelists, our guests, staff and students of Islamic University in Uganda and other universities, IUIU is providing this platform to demonstrate solidarity with the people of Palestine. We oppose injustice, and we wish for the Palestine people a free life where they govern themselves in their own country. We call upon everybody to do whatever is in his capacity or in their means to make Palestine free. And we pray to the Almighty Allah to establish justice for the Palestine people and to give them victory, inshallah. And with those few remarks, I want to really once again thank our panelists for getting this time. It may look very simple, but inshallah, with our good hearts, Allah is going to reward us and get the victory, inshallah. And once again, I want to thank the panelists for this time. We know that life outside there is not easy, and even accessing this venue, we really thank the panelists, those who have dared the traffic jam, and Allah is going to reward us abundantly. And the students, we really wish that you are the generation to manage this world in future, or starting from today, inshallah. I wish everybody a good deliberation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.